My name is Alex. I'm 28, and I live in a small apartment in the city with my girlfriend, Rachel. We've been together for 3 years, and if I'm being honest, things haven't felt bad. They've just felt stagnant. At first, I didn't mind it. I'd always been the type of guy who was okay with the slow, steady grind. But after a while, something started to feel off. The spark that used to be there, it was just gone. That evening, I came home from work, hoping we could watch our usual Netflix show and just wind down. But Rachel was sitting on the couch with a serious look on her face, something I hadn't seen in a while. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and her eyes avoided mine as I set my bag down. "Hey," I said, trying to keep it light. "Long day." She didn't immediately respond. She just took a deep breath and looked at me with a kind of sadness in her eyes that I hadn't prepared for. "Alex," she started, her voice low, "I need to talk to you about something." I sat next to her, my heart picking up a little speed. I knew this wasn't going to be just a let's chat about dinner plans kind of talk. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she continued, her eyes finally meeting mine. "And I need to be honest with you." I could tell from the tone in her voice that this wasn't going to be easy. I braced myself, not knowing what was coming. "I like you, Alex," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm not in love with you anymore." I froze, unsure if I had heard her correctly. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. "Rachel, what do you mean?" I asked after a beat, feeling the edges of panic starting to creep in. I was trying to stay calm, to understand. But her words stung. She let out a sigh, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I mean exactly what I said. I care about you. I do. But the romantic love I felt for you is gone. And I don't want to keep pretending that things are the way they used to be. I still value you as a person, as a friend, but I don't think we're together anymore." I was trying to process it, to understand it. My mind was racing, but my body remained still, almost in disbelief. "So what does that mean?" I finally asked, my voice steady but tight with the fear of what was coming next. She took a breath, looking down at her hands. "I think it's time for us to stop pretending that we're more than roommates. I still want us to live together, but I think it needs to be as friends, without the pressure of being in a romantic relationship." Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Was this the end? Was she breaking up with me? Was this how it was going to be? "You're saying you want us to keep living together, but not as a couple?" I asked, the confusion rising inside me. Rachel nodded, her face a mask of uncertainty. "Yeah, I don't want to break up. I just think we need to shift things. I can't keep pretending that I'm in love with you when I'm not." I stared at her, my mind whirling. I had no idea how to respond. I felt like everything we had built together was slowly crumbling, but at the same time, I didn't want to lose her completely. I wasn't sure if I was making the right choice, but I nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest with me, Rachel. I guess I understand. I just didn't see this coming." She reached for my hand, her touch warm but uncertain. "I hope we can still be friends. I don't want you to feel like I'm abandoning you." The unease started creeping in, but I pushed it down. Yeah, I can do that." As she left the room to go to bed, I stayed behind, my thoughts a tangled mess. What was I supposed to do now? I had no idea where things stood. She wasn't in love with me anymore, but we were still living together, still spending our days under the same roof. Could we even make that work? The quiet in the apartment felt deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something huge had just shifted, something I couldn't take back. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation was the first step toward the beginning of the end of what had once been a love story. The morning after Rachel's confession, I woke up with a sense of unease, but also, strangely, relief. There was a shift, something unspoken but tangible in the air between us. I knew I had to change things, but I wasn't sure how to start. When Rachel rolled over and reached out to me, I didn't respond the way I usually did. I didn't lean in for a morning kiss or hold her like I used to. Instead, I gave her a quick, neutral smile and mumbled a good morning. I kept my distance. She seemed to notice the shift immediately, but she didn't say anything, just nodded and got up to start her routine. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to make things awkward between us. But the truth was, I felt the need to pull away. I had to. I had to stop pretending we were still in a relationship when, in reality, we weren't. As I showered and dressed, I realized I had already made the first move. I wasn't going to keep up any pretense that we were still lovers. When Rachel asked what our dinner plans were, I replied flatly, "I'm going to eat out tonight." The words slipped out before I even thought about it. She frowned a little, and there was a brief pause in the air between us. Normally, we'd have discussed what to eat together, debated what sounded good, but now, it was like we were living in parallel lives. There was no more need to pretend I was invested in this relationship. I wasn't, at least not in the same way I had been. Later, when the flower delivery service I had set up for Rachel popped into my mind, I realized how absurd it was. She wasn't my girlfriend anymore, not in the way I had always thought of her. So, I canceled it. Why would I continue to spend money on romantic gestures for someone who didn't love me in return? It felt strange, but somehow right. Rachel didn't mention the flowers. She seemed to sense the change, the distance between us. But she didn't confront me. She just kept her distance, too, in a way. We went through the motions of our day, the usual small talk and polite exchanges, but it felt hollow, like two strangers sharing a space rather than partners. That evening, I retreated into my personal space. I grabbed a book and sat on the couch in the living room, ignoring the TV, not even glancing at her as she moved around the apartment. For the first time in ages, I felt no urge to engage, to join in. It was liberating, honestly. It was like the weight of pretending had been lifted. I no longer had to play a part. I no longer had to invest emotionally in someone who wasn't invested in me. Rachel gave me a glance as she headed into the kitchen, but there was no conversation. No request to join her, no casual offer to share dinner. It was quiet. Too quiet, almost. But I found peace in it. For once, there was no expectation. No pretending. I had begun to see the new dynamic. We were roommates now, not lovers. And I felt something stir within me, a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. There was no emotional labor anymore. I wasn't doing things because I felt obligated to keep the relationship alive. I didn't need to perform any romantic gestures, try to reignite something that was already gone. I could just exist. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own emotions, my own life. There was a strange comfort in knowing that I wasn't required to give more than I was willing to anymore. I wasn't sure where things would go from here. I wasn't sure if Rachel would continue to pretend that things were the same, or if she would finally accept the reality of our situation. But one thing was certain. I was no longer pretending. I was no longer holding on to a relationship that had already slipped away. The first step I took towards solidifying our new dynamic was to carve out some space. Literally. The office had always been our shared space, the one where we worked side by side. But now, it felt wrong. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a reminder of what we had been and what we were no longer. I had decided to move my things into the spare bedroom. It wasn't much, just a desk, a chair, a few shelves, but it was mine. A new territory. A place that was separate from everything Rachel and I had built together. I hadn't mentioned it to her yet, but I knew I had to. The shift needed to be more than just emotional. It had to be physical. There needed to be a clear line drawn, something concrete that made the new roommate situation real. As I set up my new workspace, Rachel knocked gently on the door of what had been our office. She leaned in, looking at the half-finished arrangement with a confused expression. "What are you doing?" I paused, pushing a chair into place. "I think it's better if we have distinct spaces," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't want to sound defensive, but I knew this was going to be hard for her to understand. It was hard for me, too. She stepped inside, glancing around. Distinct spaces? Her voice was soft, like she was trying to make sense of it. "We're still together, right?" I paused, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. "We're not. Not together in the way we used to be," I said, my heart beating a little faster as I spoke the truth. "I don't think there's any love left between us, Rachel. Not like that." She frowned, her face going from confusion to a kind of hurt I hadn't expected. "But we're still together, right?" she asked again, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give her. "I don't think that's how this works anymore," I replied. "If there's no love, then it's hard to see how we can stay together. But we can live here like two friends sharing a space." Her face went pale, and she crossed her arms tightly across her chest, as if to shield herself from the words. I could see her processing it, trying to understand what I was saying, but the truth was too clear. She took a deep breath and said nothing more, turning and leaving the room quietly. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space that used to feel like ours. It was final now, in a way. There was no more pretending. I had set a boundary, one that could not be ignored, no matter how much she might want to. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was fleeting. What we had before, the closeness, the affection, the intimacy, it was gone. It wasn't healthy for either of us to keep pretending it was still there, especially when we both knew it wasn't. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. It was Friday night when Rachel decided to try again. She had always been the type to believe in grand gestures, and tonight, she was hoping it would be enough to rekindle something between us. She spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, putting together an elaborate spread from an upscale restaurant we had enjoyed on one of our few romantic nights out. When I walked into the living room, the smell of fresh, rich dishes filled the air, but the sight of it didn't do what it used to. It didn't make me feel warm or happy. It felt like a performance, something to check off a list, something she hoped would make things feel right again. "Dinner's ready," Rachel said, her voice tentative as she looked up at me, waiting for some sign of excitement or joy. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I simply nodded. "Looks good." She sat across from me at the table, her eyes scanning me as if she could find a clue in my expression, something that would signal to her that we were still us. But I didn't feel it. I didn't feel us. We ate in silence, the clinking of cutlery and the occasional sound of chewing filling the void between us. Rachel looked like she was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure what she wanted to hear. After a few minutes, she leaned forward, setting her fork down gently. "Maybe we should split the bill," she suggested, her voice quieter than usual, almost testing me. I looked at her, then at the food, and for a moment, I felt the weight of her words sink in. She wasn't just talking about the meal, she was talking about everything. She was testing the waters, trying to see if I was still emotionally invested enough to pretend this was a romantic evening. But I wasn't. Not anymore. "Yeah, sure," I said, offering no protest. "We can split it." Her face faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, smiling a little too brightly. "Right, yeah, of course." She picked up her phone, tapping on it distractedly, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing second. I finished my meal, pushing my plate aside and standing up. "I'm heading to the gym," I said, feeling the need to leave, to distance myself. She nodded without looking up, and I could see the disappointment in her face, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. As I grabbed my keys, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. "Can we talk when you get back?" I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to engage. Instead, I threw my gym bag over my shoulder and walked out the door, the weight of her unspoken words lingering in the air. Later that night, I received a string of messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Rachel, I don't want to lose you. I'm just trying to fix things, can't you see that? Rachel, why are you pulling away from me? What happened to us? Rachel, please, Alex, we need to talk. This isn't what I want. I still care about you." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I left my phone in the car while I went inside the gym, plugging into my music and focusing on the workout. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of clarity, like I wasn't just existing in a relationship out of habit. I was doing something for myself. When I returned to the apartment later, Rachel was sitting on the couch, her face downcast. She looked up when I walked in, eyes wide, clearly waiting for me to say something, anything, to bridge the growing divide between us. But I just walked past her, into the bedroom. "I'm going to bed," I said simply. She didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. As I lay down in bed, I realized that I wasn't just physically distancing myself from her. I was emotionally detaching, too. I had stopped playing the role of her boyfriend, the one who would say the comforting words, who would try to smooth things over, who would pretend that everything was fine. Instead, I was becoming the person she had asked for, a roommate, nothing more. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. There was no pressure to fix things, no pressure to pretend that we were still in love. It was just quiet, and it was exactly what I needed. The weekend rolled in, and Rachel seemed determined to fix what was broken. She had always been good at that, putting on a smile, cooking a nice meal, suggesting a fun outing, but no matter what she tried, I couldn't bring myself to pretend anymore. It started on Saturday morning. She made my favorite breakfast, pancakes with extra syrup and a side of crispy bacon, and laid it out on the kitchen table with a hopeful smile. I hadn't asked for it, but there it was, as if she believed it would make everything feel normal again. "Hey, I made pancakes," she said brightly, pulling out the chair across from me. I didn't smile back. I didn't give her anything more than a neutral thanks. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the effort, but I couldn't pretend I felt the same way. I didn't feel the same way. After breakfast, Rachel suggested we take a walk in the park, like we used to. But I knew the routine. It was the same kind of tactic she always pulled when she wanted to recreate the illusion that we were still a couple. I think I'll just stay here, I said. I've got some things to do. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded, looking disappointed. But she didn't push me. Not immediately, anyway. Later that afternoon, she cooked dinner. Something elaborate again, something she thought would win me back, or at least show her effort. It was a beautiful spread, but I couldn't bring myself to eat with the enthusiasm I once would have. Do you want to go out later? Rachel asked, sitting down beside me. Maybe see a movie or something? I shook my head. I'm good, thanks. I'll probably just stay in tonight. She took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with frustration before she masked it with a smile. Okay, whatever you want. The evening passed in a strange, almost suffocating silence. She didn't make a move toward me, and I didn't offer her anything to suggest that I might want to close the distance between us. She had tried everything, the meals, the gestures, the small talk, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't invested in the relationship anymore. By Sunday, Rachel was getting desperate. She made my favorite meal, steak with mashed potatoes, exactly how I liked it, and served it to me with a hopeful smile. When I finished eating, she didn't even ask if I wanted seconds, just looked at me and waited for something. I let the silence stretch, then stood up. I'm heading out. Gonna run some errands. I didn't wait for her response before I grabbed my coat. I couldn't sit there anymore, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't want to keep saying the same tired words, trying to mask the truth. That night, when Rachel's sister called about a family dinner, I finally took the opportunity to draw a line in the sand. Are you coming? She asked, her voice light. I shook my head. No. You should go, though. Or bring a friend. Rachel walked past the living room when I said it, her face falling at the sound of my words. I didn't care if it hurt her. I couldn't keep pretending we were a couple when she had already made it clear she didn't feel the same way. I thought we were still, she started, but I cut her off, my voice calm. We're not. Not like that, Rachel. You made your choice when you told me you didn't love me anymore. I'm just a roommate now. That's it. Her face went pale, and she looked down, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation had finally hit her. I saw it then, the panic starting to set in. She had told me she wanted to keep living together, to maintain the friendship, but now, she was realizing the full weight of what she had asked. Don't say that, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please. I didn't mean for this to happen. But I didn't soften. I couldn't. I had given everything, and now, I was empty. I had nothing left to give. I couldn't keep investing in a relationship where I was no longer wanted. I'm not doing this anymore, Rachel, I said quietly. I'm not going to keep pretending. I'm just going to treat you like a friend, like you asked. Nothing more. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she said nothing. She just turned and left the room, retreating into the silence that had taken over our home. I stood there, in the living room, feeling the heavy weight of the moment, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. The truth was, I was finally free. Rachel's behavior became more frantic as the days passed. Her attempts to regain my attention were relentless, each one more desperate than the last. She cooked my favorite meals, put on her brightest smile, and tried to recreate the romance we had shared. But I wasn't fooled. I could see right through it all, and I wasn't going to fall back into that pattern. On Saturday morning, I found a note on the counter. Hey, I've planned a surprise dinner for us tonight. Please don't make other plans, okay? We really need to talk. The words were soft, pleading almost. But I knew what it was. Another effort to reclaim something that had already slipped away. I didn't even respond to the note. Instead, I spent the day doing my own thing, away from the apartment, as if to reinforce the distance between us. Rachel didn't like that, I could tell. When I finally returned home, she was waiting for me, her eyes wide with anxiety. Alex, I've been thinking, she started, trailing off when I just nodded, uninterested. She went on anyway, her voice higher than usual. We need to fix this. I'm still here, still care about you. I know you don't feel the same, but we can try, right? I didn't react the way she wanted. I wasn't going to pretend. Rachel, I'm just not interested in trying anymore. I'm not invested in the relationship. Not in the way I was before. My tone was calm, but the words stung, and I could see them sinking in. Her lips trembled, and her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I had said everything I needed to say. I wasn't going to play the role of the boyfriend she wanted me to be when I wasn't feeling it anymore. That night, after her dinner attempt failed to bring us closer, she came to me again, asking if I could help with a car repair. My brakes are making a weird sound, and it's really stressing me out, she said, looking at me with pleading eyes. You know more about cars than I do. I don't know who else to turn to. I hesitated for a moment before answering. You need to ask your friends or family. I'm not your mechanic anymore, Rachel. We're roommates. Roommates don't help each other with things like that. She seemed taken aback, like she hadn't expected me to be so firm, so unyielding. But we've helped each other with everything, she said softly, like a whisper of the past. Please, Alex. No, I replied, my voice final. I'm not going to keep doing things for you when there's nothing left between us. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to you. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. She just looked at me for a moment before turning away, retreating back into her shell. That evening, Chloe, Rachel's best friend, came by to visit. I could see the way she looked at me, her eyes full of judgment and reproach. She always did that when Rachel was upset. I didn't mind it as much anymore. She's really struggling, you know, Chloe said, crossing her arms as she looked me up and down. You can't just shut her out like this. You're being selfish, Alex. I didn't flinch at her words. Instead, I crossed my own arms and met her gaze steadily. Am I? You think I'm being selfish? I'm doing what's best for me. For once. You think Rachel would have treated me the same if the roles were reversed? Chloe blinked, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She hadn't expected me to fight back, to question her logic, and I didn't give her any room to respond. If you're so sure about her being right, maybe you should be the one who steps in, I said coldly, watching her face change as she tried to process what I had just said. I'm not here to be her emotional punching bag, Chloe, and I'm done playing the role she wants me to play. She stood there, speechless. Rachel's emotional manipulation tactics weren't new to me, but as I saw it unfold before me, I realized just how deep it had gone. She had spent years pushing and pulling, trying to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like I was the one who was in the wrong. But not anymore. Rachel didn't come back that night. I was fine with it. In fact, I was relieved. I needed my space to think. The following days played out much the same. She kept pushing, trying to get closer, trying to pull me back in. But each time, I stood firm. I refused to let myself be sucked back into something I no longer believed in. When Rachel tried to initiate intimacy, I rejected her. I couldn't bring myself to touch someone who wasn't in love with me, who had already chosen to step away emotionally. Every time she reached out, I pulled further away, my boundaries becoming clearer with every passing day. She was spiraling, I could tell, but I wouldn't be part of that spiral. Not anymore. It had been weeks since Rachel's confession, and I had stuck to my resolve. We were roommates, nothing more. Her attempts to regain my affection had grown more desperate, but I remained firm, refusing to give in to her tactics. The emotional distance between us had only widened, and I was starting to feel the weight of it lift off my shoulders, little by little. But Rachel wasn't done yet. On a Sunday afternoon, she came to me with a new approach, one last attempt at reconciliation. She stood in the doorway of the living room, looking vulnerable and small, the way she hadn't in a long time. I could see her shaking slightly, her usual confidence replaced with a sense of insecurity. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, setting the book I was reading down and watching her carefully. I had heard her out before, but something in her eyes told me this was different. She took a deep breath, wiping her hands nervously on her jeans. I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I realize now that I messed up. I guess I wanted you to fight for me. I wanted you to prove that you still loved me, that you still cared about us. But now, I see how wrong that was. My heart didn't race, my stomach didn't flip. I felt nothing. I had already been here, already been hurt, already been through the emotional ringer. The emotional weight of our relationship had been so heavy for so long that I had no more tears left to cry. I shouldn't have put you through that, Rachel continued. I was testing you, and I see now that it wasn't fair. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. I didn't feel a rush of relief, like I thought I might. Instead, I felt more of the same emptiness. She had confessed, she had apologized, but it was too late. She had already told me she didn't love me. She had already chosen to pull away emotionally, leaving me to pick up the pieces. There was nothing left to salvage. You shouldn't have put me through this at all, I replied softly, not a hint of emotion in my voice. You wanted me to fight for you, but I stopped fighting when you told me you didn't want it anymore. I can't love someone who doesn't love me back, Rachel. Her face flushed, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. She stepped forward, her voice desperate. We can try again, though. We can go to therapy. We can start fresh. We don't have to end this. I can fix it. I shook my head. It's not about therapy or starting fresh. It's about the fact that you already gave up on us. You chose to stop loving me, and now I can't just flip a switch and act like it's okay. I can't keep showing love to someone who doesn't want it. Rachel's expression faltered. She looked at me, hurt and confused, as if she didn't quite understand how I could be so resolute. The pleading in her eyes was almost painful, but I didn't give in. I couldn't. She stood there in silence for a moment, staring at me, trying to process everything I had just said. Then, finally, she spoke. I never thought this would happen. I thought we could work through it, she whispered. Rachel, I said quietly, you made your decision when you told me you weren't in love with me. I've already accepted that. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her chest rising and falling with quiet sobs. Then, she nodded, as if accepting something I had already known for a long time. She stood up slowly, a tearful look still on her face. I guess this is it, then, she murmured. I can't keep fighting you. I can't make you love me again. I didn't say anything. What was left to say? She stood in the doorway for a long time before turning to walk away. But just before she left, she paused and looked back at me, her voice quiet, but full of finality. I hope you find what you're looking for, Alex. I really do. And then, just like that, she was gone. The weight in my chest had lifted. I had already done the hardest part, letting go. And now, the air felt clearer. It wasn't about anger or frustration anymore. It was just the quiet understanding that this was the end. Rachel had walked away in her own way, and I had done the same. I took a deep breath, the emptiness in the apartment now somehow feeling like freedom. It had been several weeks since Rachel had packed up her things and moved out. At first, the apartment felt hollow, quiet, and empty, strange without her things scattered around, without the soft hum of our daily routine. But as the days passed, I started to realize something. The silence wasn't as uncomfortable as I'd imagined it would be. In fact, it felt peaceful. I had the space I needed, physically and emotionally. I could think clearly again. Living alone was a relief. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to maintain the facade of a relationship that had long since died. The emotional weight that had burdened me for so long, trying to keep Rachel happy while constantly being reminded that I wasn't enough, had lifted. I'd started focusing on myself again, something I hadn't done in months. I enrolled in a woodworking class, something I'd always wanted to try but had put on the back burner. The feeling of carving wood, shaping something with my own hands, felt grounding. I had forgotten what it was like to have a passion that didn't revolve around someone else's needs or expectations. One evening, as I sat in my small studio working on a chair I'd started building, I received a notification on my phone. It was from a mutual friend of Rachel and mine, asking how I was doing. I took a deep breath and set my tools down, deciding to finally explain things. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but I felt like this person deserved the truth. I texted back calmly, explaining that Rachel and I had gone through a difficult period, and I'd finally made the decision to let go. I told them how the relationship had stagnated, how Rachel had admitted she no longer felt romantically invested in me, and how we had shifted to being roommates, only for her to try and pull me back in emotionally. I explained that I had decided to stop pretending and let go, and that, while it was painful at first, I was now feeling liberated. The responses came quickly. Some of our friends didn't know the full story, and they expressed support, understanding how hard it must have been. One by one, Rachel's narrative about me being the one who gave up started to crumble. More and more people reached out to me, telling me that they understood now and that they supported my decision. It wasn't that I wanted to tear Rachel down or expose her. There was no bitterness in me anymore, but the truth was important. I had been manipulated for so long that now, when people reached out to me with sympathy or concern, I felt the need to set the record straight. I had done the right thing by walking away, and it felt good to have others recognize that. I didn't want to become someone who was bitter or angry. I wanted to move forward. And as I started sharing my story, piece by piece, I realized I was doing just that. I was moving on. I didn't want to be the person Rachel had tried to make me out to be, the one who couldn't let go, the one who wasn't strong enough to stand up for himself. I was stronger than that. I had finally realized my own worth. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was sitting at a coffee shop when Rachel's name appeared on my phone. It wasn't a surprise. She had reached out a couple of times since moving out, but I hadn't responded. I looked at the screen for a moment, then hit ignore. I didn't need closure from her. I had closure now. The truth was, I had already started to rebuild my life. I had the freedom to focus on my passions again. I wasn't carrying the emotional burden of trying to fix something that wasn't fixable. I could see clearly now. In the quiet aftermath of everything, I felt like I was finally starting to understand myself, who I was without the weight of someone else's expectations, without trying to make a relationship work that wasn't meant to. I spent my weekends at the woodworking shop, getting lost in my projects. I explored new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and began considering the idea of dating again, but this time, with someone who truly valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. My future didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt full of possibility. Rachel's move-out day arrived quietly, as I had expected. She had packed up most of her things over the past few days, leaving only the final touches, clothes, a few personal items scattered around the apartment. I hadn't anticipated a dramatic confrontation, nor did I want one. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just done. I stood by the door as she zipped up her last bag, her face unreadable. She had asked me a few days earlier if I wanted to help her with the move, but I had declined. It felt like too much of an effort to pretend to be involved when I had already emotionally checked out. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was just that I was tired of carrying someone else's emotional weight, of trying to patch up something that had already broken. "Are you sure you don't want to talk before I go?" she asked, her voice softer now. There was no more pleading, no more demands. She had given up the fight. I could see it in her eyes. She had accepted the reality that we were both walking away, no longer tethered to each other by a relationship that had outlived its purpose. I shook my head. "We've already talked. We've said everything that needed to be said." Rachel nodded slowly, her lips pressed tight, but I could see the familiar sadness in her eyes. It didn't feel like the end of a love story. It just felt like the end. We were two people who had shared a life for a time, but now, it was time to move on. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You too," she replied, her voice barely a whisper as she turned to leave. She hesitated for a moment, like she might say something else, but in the end, she just stepped out the door, leaving me standing in the quiet apartment. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing in the stillness that filled the space. It felt different now, quieter, lighter. It was as if a weight had been lifted, but not the kind I had expected. There was no bitterness in my heart. There was no anger or sadness, just relief. I walked through the apartment, taking in the emptiness. The furniture that had once been filled with memories now felt like an old story I no longer needed to tell. The place where we had shared so much was now mine again. It wasn't a sad moment. It was a freeing one. I walked over to the wall where we had once hung up pictures of vacations, birthdays, random snapshots of our time together. I stared at them for a moment. Then, with a sense of finality, took them all down. They were part of a different chapter of my life, one I had already closed. The apartment felt like a blank canvas now. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. There were still a few boxes to unpack, and the space didn't feel quite like mine yet. But it would. I'd make it my own. Over the next few days, I focused on settling into this new chapter of my life. I started painting the walls of the apartment in a shade of blue I had always loved, but had never dared to put in a shared space. I picked out a few new pieces of furniture, things that felt more me. I even ordered a few plants to fill the empty corners. I had the space, the time, and the freedom to rediscover who I was, without anyone else's expectations or needs pulling at me. I spent my weekends painting, walking around the city, and reconnecting with old friends. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down by the emotional labor I had carried for so long. One evening, a week after Rachel left, I received a final text from her. I didn't even have to look at it to know it was her. I hope you're doing okay. I'm really sorry for how things turned out. I hope you find someone who can give you what I couldn't. I felt no anger, no desire to respond with a sharp word or a cold reply. Instead, I simply deleted the message. I didn't need to engage in that story anymore. I realized something that night. I had already moved on. I had moved on before she walked out the door. A few weeks later, I went on my first date since the breakup. It was easy, casual, comfortable. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I could be with someone who valued me for who I was, not just what I could offer. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't healed. But I was free. Free to make my own decisions, to follow my own path. The future felt bright. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to it.